Now, broadcasting from Titletown, USA, here's Joe Simon.
And there it is, our new show theme song. And we have that voice in the studio with us, coming from the West Coast, the left coast, the sunny side of town. Bryan Duncan. There he is.
I'm just 3 miles from the epicenter.
The
That's the word. Yeah.
So, talking off air, this is going to be fun. Typically we get into the talking to a CPA about the tax law changes and how can we take this money and move it there, and living the best life ever and all of those wonderful things. Those are all really important. But we also
I should have taken notes. I guess I should have been taking notes. Because, I'm a musician and we don't come with a benefits package, at the end of your life.
We'll talk after air. But so the voice you heard just a little bit of as we got going, that's this guy's voice, Bryan Duncan. And
right.
he doesn't like this. I know he doesn't. But for people that don't know him, and I know it's hard to believe, but for people that don't know Bryan Duncan, over 1 million record sales in his 35-year career, a Grammy awardee for his Andre Crouch tribute, as well as receiving multiple Grammy nominations, winner of 4 Dove Awards, and this is the one that I like, not maybe the most, I'm not sure, Christian Music Hall of Famer as of 2007. But what he's doing lately is nutshell sermons.
Yeah, there's no planning on what your trophies don't last very long. There's an old hymn in church that said, "Till my trophies at last I lay down." Because, all I do, I've got a few over here, and all you do is dust them later, and nobody sees them. And, so you better be feeling pretty good about what you're doing, whether you get in a round of applause or not.
Yeah. This is the first official question I want to ask you. I stated this on X the other day. So would you say you're a soprano, an alto, or a baritone?
Oh man, I have no idea. I flunked out a choir, but I'm a tenor voice. There's no doubt about that.
Okay,
it's tenor. My dad used to say 10 or 12 notes off key, but whatever.
Yeah. Tell us about your dad. I read something about him. He was a Pentecostal preacher, and that really seems to be a foundation to how things started to go and grow for you.
Well, in Pentecostal church, you learn how to scream early on. So I fit right into the rock and roll scene because, I can do James Brown in a heartbeat. In fact, I thought James Brown was my dad on the radio once. Like, hey, that sounds like Dad.
So let me mention some names, and we'll play name recognition. And what comes to your mind first? So James Brown.
I feel good. It's like, I grew up on that stuff. So, and screaming just felt right. And he felt like he was bringing soul, funk, and Pentecostal religion.
Well, he has some of that in his background. If you've ever read his bio, he was sort of raised in a lot of things, but the experiences that he's had were in a Pentecostal church.
Yeah, I never met him, and so I don't really know a lot about his background. I just, I've got all his records though.
What about the fifth dimension? That's kind of a left-hand turn here. What does that come to? What does that say in your mind?
Kind of synthetic pop music. I wasn't a big fan. I remember, "Would you like to ride?" It was closer to church music that I grew up on almost.
Yeah.
Except the harmonies were nice. I don't know why you brought them up. I don't play any of their stuff.
Yeah, there was a song, and I can't think of it now, but there were some lines and some background in one of your songs that sort of minded me of the Fifth Dimension. And I just kind of wondered if that was a little bit of an influencer in your life growing up. What about
Have
Andre?
you heard any of? Have you heard the recent nutshells? I posted what you're probably hearing is Bob Carlisle. Um,
We've been
he
talking about
stacks
him.
vocals. Yeah, he's a professional. Before he had a big hit, he was a background singer, and he was on everybody's record. And we've been friends for back clear to my early Sweet Comfort band days. And he's stacked. He's been on most of my records at some point. So there's these big stacks of sweet vocals
Yeah.
that they usually remind me of the Beach Boys or something. But okay, if it sounded like Fifth Dimension to you, that's fine because
Yeah.
Bob is Six Dimensions all by himself.
The Sixth Dimension. So here's
Yeah, he
another
stacks
one.
vocals.
Here's another one. A lot of room for this one. Andre Crouch.
I toured with him over in Europe. I didn't know him real well, but I saw him for the first time at Knott's Berry Farm with a lot of guys that I would eventually work with. And man, I didn't think anybody could be closer to God than him. And he was he was more straightforward about Jesus. And I kind of never was quite that well. But um, what's really interesting about him? His songs were ubiquitous, and they cut the barriers between black gospel and white church people.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody was singing his songs, and I sung on his tribute record, and I was on tour with him over in Norway, and but as soon as he was gone, I sang at his funeral. As soon as he was gone, it's like, wow, they don't sing any of those songs anymore,
Yeah.
or at least most people.
So here's a little political thought here on that is, do you still believe that 11 o'clock a.m. on Sunday, I shouldn't say do you still believe, do you believe that 11 o'clock on Sundays in America is the most segregated hour of our week?
Never gave it much thought like that.
Yeah.
I've been in so many churches that yeah, I know there's a a variety of thoughts
Yeah.
and opinions and conjectures, and
Yeah.
these days there's people in church saying some stuff, and I'm going, where did you find that in the scriptures? Um, but I'm not going to spend all my time pointing out everybody else's
Right.
defects. I'm sure when we get to heaven, I'm going to be corrected seriously, and be grateful that I got into heaven knowing what I know.
That's so true. Yeah. So let's talk about this Reagan movie that was recently released. Dennis Quaid and John Voight were stars in that. Um, Tell me how you got involved with that and had the song "Do I Say Goodbye."
Um, Joseph, I can't think of his name right. Mark Joseph he's in the film work industry,
Hmm.
later on in years, but he was always a fan of the Sweet Comfort band in the early days, and he called me up out of the clear blue, said he was doing this movie, and wondered if I wanted to write something for it. So he sent me a script, and I wrote two songs for it. One was called My One Desire, and the other one was Do I Say Goodbye, and it was just based on the story that I had read from the movie script. I'd never seen any clips or anything. And so I wrote those songs, and we did a demo of them, and I never heard from them for 5 years. It was
Really,
like,
5 years.
and then I saw a commercial on TV. and going, well, the Reagan movie's out. Oh, I guess they didn't use our stuff. And then a week after that, I get a call from him saying, well, your song isn't in the movie officially, but we want to put it on the soundtrack. So
Okay.
they wanted us to go in and record it for real with my old band. And so that's kind of how that happened. And being on the soundtrack is actually better than being in the movie, because in a movie scene, you might get 15 seconds to 30 seconds of a song, and then they move on. So um, it's on the Reagan movie soundtrack, and you can hear the whole song.
Do I say goodbye?
Yeah.
Excellent.
It was about when he came to to the end of his life where he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's.
You forget?
And he realized he had to make a decision that it was time to stop doing what he loved,
Right.
which was horseback riding. And I couldn't relate to a lot of the movie because, he was in a position of leadership that I've never been in.
Yeah.
But I could certainly relate to making a choice about having to let go of something you love.
Yeah. So there's a style of music that it feels to me, sitting on the curb here watching the parade go by, when you sing and when you perform and the way in which it moves and makes you move, that neo soul band that you had a cool relationship with. How did that start? Has it officially ended? What's behind that sound?
Well, I was at the end of my career. I wasn't on a major label, and I was facing a divorce. My wife, after about 8 or 9 years of trying to work things, we were married for 26 years, and I was just sitting on the curb. I mean,
Yeah.
just out of it, and wondering if there was anything left. That's why I'm going. Do I say goodbye? That was one of the many places where I reached a point in my life where I realized that I couldn't stay where I've been. And I met Ricky B. Rogers. He was a bass player up in Seattle, and we would talk on the phone and mostly commiserate about what was disappointing about music, about the music business. And it was like we loved what we were doing. We would sing and we'd make stuff sound good and then just love it. And then we would be disappointed because it never got the reaction from people that we expected. And so we wrote a song called You Got to Do What You Love and You Got to Love What You Get. And that's the harder part. But he said, man, you should just come up and do some of your old songs. We've followed your music for years. And he said, I have a bunch of friends up here that, play funk soul. And that's how it started. So I just said, well, you guys pick the songs that you like, and I'll come up there and we'll do a concert.
Wow.
And those guys were so good that I think I just stood there dumbfounded, come out on the stage, and they played this stuff for about 5 minutes. And I'm going, I'm not even coming in singing because it's just, it was smoking.
Yeah.
And so from there, we did a couple of records, a neo soul Christmas and Still Dancing.
Yep.
Still Dancing was about, I don't know where I am, but I know how I'll be. We all reach a point in our lives where we kind of have to reinvent who we are by what we do.
Yeah.
And that's still going on, by the way.
Yeah. Hey, you know what? I want to, for the short timers, people that have a short wick on watching these, what I want to do is conclude part one. I want to encourage you to follow up with part two. And we're going to get into talking more about neo soul, but also this thing that Bryan spends a lot of time on. He says it takes 2 minutes to do in each case, the nutshell sermon. So stick with us. We're going to continue in part two, talking with Bryan Duncan.
Cool.
You've been listening to the Joe Simon Podcast. Big ideas with powerful stories and real-time solutions. Business succession planning, executive benefits, employee benefits, tax beneficial savings, and more. Remember, information discussed here today is dated and not specific to your situation. Always seek personal counsel from qualified advisors. For more about Joe Simon, go to DaVinciInsurance.com. Joe Simon is a licensed insurance agent in the state of Wisconsin. Licensed to advise on accident and health, life insurance, disability insurance, and annuities, as well as qualified long-term care insurance. Make sure to visit the DaVinciInsurance.com archives for more of our podcasts.